Let me tell you about an incredible church that I know of. As I personally know the lead shepherd pastor of this church. You know, everybody likes a growing church, and this one is consistently, it's getting larger every week. Really started quite small, but now it's become quite a sizable group. But yet there's a functioning place for every person who comes. Folks don't drift away from this church to the latest, hottest, newest that may be around. There's a place for everyone. It's just an amazing administration in this congregation. And given my background with my music education and ministry and so on, and one of the most startling aspects of this church is that it doesn't have any element of the worship wars, that are so common in churches. It should be this way or that way, louder, softer, contemporary, traditional, whatever. There's just none of that there. The music is honestly, though, this is kind of surprising, given our day, the music seems to be very heavily tilted toward a choral music thing, and though I'd be good with that and had a lot of background in that, I know most people today aren't nearly as tuned into that. Yet at this place, it seems just totally normal, and it's really, really outstanding. Another feature is that there just isn't any complaining. There's no complaining amongst the folks about really anything, and it's kind of because the founding pastor of the church set it up from the beginning, that there really just wasn't a lot to complain about, really anything to complain about. Prepared kind of for everything that could arise, and everything was kind of taken care of. And according to my pastor friend, there's a consistent display there of mutual love and joy and peace, just no bickering. And there just isn't really anything to fight about. And it's not too cold. It's not too hot. The music isn't too loud or too reserved. The teaching's really clear. Nobody criticizes it as inaccurate or too academic or too simplistic. There's no one saying, I just don't feel like I'm getting fed. And wow, what a church. I mean, wouldn't you like to be a part of a church like that? Where is this church? I mean, can we go see it? Is it in driving distance? Well, no, you actually can't get there by car. You can get there by air, but you can't actually drive there. But you can get there. I mean, that's the good news. But the bad news is you have to die first to get there, because this church is in heaven. And right now, well, we're stuck here trying to replicate that as best we can, doing it as sinners ourselves in a sin-filled world prior to that pastor coming for us, and a restoration of all things into a perfect state. And sometimes in local church communities like this or others in town here in the country, we do a pretty good job sometimes. We get to experience a little bit of what life is like. In a daily experience with Pastor Jesus and the Redeemer Church of Heaven on Gold Street in the eternal kingdom. And other times, though, we and other local churches on earth here, we struggle with difficult times, with difficult people and circumstances. And we can call those struggles challenges to ministry. Challenges to ministry. That's our title, and that's our theme today. We want heaven, and we expect the church on earth to be like it, but, well, we're here on earth, and we're going to get inferior products here on earth. And is it any wonder? We're always going to have some struggles and some challenges with both people and circumstances, both within the church and as well from the broader, more hostile culture that surrounds us outside our walls. And challenges in ministry. Here's sort of a summary of what we're talking about today. Challenges in ministry are inevitable in a fallen world. But ministry-involved people hold a local congregation, a church, together by holding fast to the objective truth of Scripture. You know, along the way, God gifts people to be those who support, and through their efforts and their faithfulness to the gifts that God's given them, to be people who help to make a local community function and thrive as part of their kingdom work in building Christ's kingdom. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about some characters from Paul's text as we are spending a number of weeks here looking through some of the pastoral epistles, particularly in 2 Timothy and into Titus. We talked about some of these characters in ministry, and some of them were just great and helpful characters. Some were really like the way we use the word characters. But among those helpful characters we talked about was one that Paul named Onesiphorus, who had supported Paul in Ephesus. And then when Paul was in prison in Rome, in this writing, he talks about how Onesiphorus had sought him out there in prison. And reading between the lines, we can't know, but it almost sounds like he maybe, by that identity, had even lost his life, because the greetings going back to Timothy in Ephesus are greet the household of Onesiphorus there. Talks about may he be rewarded for his faithfulness, that kind of thing. You get the feeling that maybe he's not with him anymore for some reason. Could it be with Paul? But you know, we all need an Onesiphorus or two or three or four in our lives. And as we grow and mature in the faith, we need to be Onesiphorus-ish, okay, with other people and encouraging and helping other people to walk along toward truth and holding fast to Scripture. As I look back, I think of an Onesiphorus character in my life. When I was a minister of music in Dallas, in Texas, and I know I often tell stories about my experience there, but it was a very profound time of my life. I was kind of going to seminary, being a minister of music in this church, which had some just amazing people in the church. And among those was one of the elders. His name was Trevor. And Trevor was a physician. He was a very well-renowned physician in Dallas and around the world. And you may have heard of him if you've been faithful in listening over the years to Focus on the Family and James Dobson. James Dobson talks about, because it was such a big event in his life, how he had been meeting with 4 board members of his organization in Colorado, and they had a private plane, were flying back to Dallas, and the plane crashed, and all 4 were killed the day after Dobson had met with them. One of those 4 was Trevor. That happened about 4 or 5 years after I had moved out of Dallas, so I knew him as a man in the church, and he was just such a neat guy. He would, and I didn't preach that much, I was a minister of music, but the several times that I did, he would come up afterwards and he'd say, he'd pick out a couple of things and he'd say, I really appreciate that point. I liked how you know, and he just encouraged me along the way. Being a physician, there was one time, I mean, my wife hardly ever gets sick, but when she gets sick, she always does it on a holiday when you can't get any help. And so he met us and he took care of us one time on a holiday when Diana was really, really, really sick, and just ministered to us, kind of Onesiphorus-ish, okay? And he lived just a few blocks from the church, and he had a as you can imagine, a really big house. In fact, my house could fit in his kitchen, okay? And so we would have baptisms at his house and in the backyard, and you could get hundreds of people in the house at the same time. It was amazing. But he just gave of himself, of his life. And that's what Onesiphorus had done. In Ephesus, he was that guy that had opened his home that the church could use it and be refreshed by it. So much, so many parallels there. And we're thankful for people like that who have blessed us along the way. And I trust that you have a strategy to think, how can I be a person like that along the way to other people? But the fact of the matter is that not everyone is a Trevor or an Onesiphorus. How do leaders in churches deal with problems, situations, and difficult people And this is the message that Paul has in the scripture we look at today in 2 Timothy in chapter 3. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, as we develop our thoughts out of the text today, I'd like to do so along 4 lines of thought. And the first is to say, from verses 1 to 5, that we will see that challenging times and culture will mark the last days. It says in these 5 verses, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. Paul says to Timothy, in the last days, there are going to be people with this whole laundry list of things that are not flattering whatsoever. What are the last days? Why is he's missed like 2,000 years ago. He's writing to Timothy and talking about something that Timothy should be aware of in that day as if it's the last days. And we often think and talk like we're living in the last days. Well, the scripture uses this phrase in a couple of different ways. The last days really marks in one usage the whole time period from when Christ ascends to heaven to when he will come again in the air to take the church away. That whole period there is really the last days. It's the final quarter. And yet, there's another way, though, and a tone in which it's used here, that the last days are these days at the very, very end of this period of time, though it's not really specific as to exactly when that's going to come and be. And there are hints in Scripture, and we talk about them. And, every generation of the church has looked for and longed for the return of Christ. And I suspect pretty much every church era has in mind that they are the folks who are living in the last days. And in one sense, the first sense, they are right, but of course there is the final days of the last days. And so many things would seem to indicate that surely it has to come now. Now, I'm going to use an illustration here that some of you are going to go, I cannot believe that Randy used that illustration. And it's about my favorite sport, soccer. And I actually enjoyed playing soccer when I was young. And I like to think I was at least decent at it, at least compared to the kids I went to school with I was. But so I'm playing soccer, and I can give you the exact date of the story that I'm going to tell you. It was November the 5th of 1968. Now, how would you remember something like that? Well, I remember it because it was election day. It was the day that Richard Nixon was elected, and we were playing a game. And then my school was right next to the firehouse, and the firehouse was the voting center in our community, the place you went. And the fire company always had a big dinner, and everybody in the community came and ate dinner and did the voting, and it was kind of a thing. And so we were going to play soccer. I was to go straight from soccer to next door to the firehouse for dinner, and that was going to be what the day was about. Well, it was a scoreless game, and I was playing what today you would call striker. There were 2 of us, I guess, and I think that's right. They used different terms back then. This was right after the ball was invented. Anyhow. And I had a good shot, and I hit the crossbar, and it bounced right back to one of our other guys, and the goalie was out of position, and he put it in, and we got a 1-0 lead. I mean, it was really, it had to be right near the end of the game, and there was no score clock. There was no electronic clock. This is 8th grade. Okay, there's no clock anywhere to know how long it is. The ref was keeping it. And himself, and which I guess is the official way they keep it. I keep looking at you. You're the soccer people here. That's how they do it, I guess. Anyhow, but at least there's a clock. And then they say, oh, but the clock's not official. But at least gives you an idea. With the sense that we're toward the end of the game. Surely we're gonna. The whistle has to blow soon here. We're playing a little more, and eventually the whistle blows. We win the game 1-0. Well, it was a local guy. from the township, who was the ref, met him at the dinner later, and he told me, he said, do you know, he says, when you guys scored that goal, there was 15 seconds left in the game. But I was afraid the other team would think I just held the game long enough for you to score. And then I said, game's over. Now the game's over. He said, so I added a few more minutes before I blew the whistle. All right? So, but that feeling, I remember that feeling, being on the field. We'd been there so long. We finally got the goal. When's this game going to end? It has to end soon. I just remember that profound feeling. It's gotta end soon. And eventually, after a couple of minutes, it did end. But that's suspense. Here's the other reason I remember. I wore glasses in those days, and we did the big celebration in the middle of the field, and everybody popped on top of each other, and a kid's arm came around, hit me on the side of the head, broke my glasses. I had a terrible price to pay for that with my parents. That's another reason why I remember that. But the suspended feeling of, surely it's got to be near the end of the game here, isn't it? And that's what it feels like, even for us today. But I don't think that's an odd feeling, an unusual feeling over the years. People have felt like, surely we're here at the end. We're living in the last time. The text here gives a list of 18 negatives about conditions of the last day. And boy, this is quite a laundry list of stuff that's not very good. But you look at this stuff and you think, man, that does sound like the day in which we live. But my grandmother looked at that list 50, 60 years ago in the World War II era and after and said, man, that looks a lot like where we live. And her parents in the World War I era list said, that looks a lot like where we live. It's a lot. And so what's really interesting is if you read this list in the original language, it's actually more interesting than reading it here. It has kind of a ring to it that gets lost in translation. Many of the words in here, groups of them, sound alike and are put together in a very creative, written way. It's kind of like saying in our English language, we said that about someone that they're malicious, they're malevolent, they're malfeasant, they're malodorous, and maladroit. That's a bad person. And basically what those means is it's a really bad person who also smells bad while he's being bad. That would be basically what it would, but you kind of make this list, and that's what it sounds like in the Greek language when you read it. The first two phrases set it up and summarize what's to follow. Lovers of self, lovers of money. Does that sound like a time in which we live? And the last two phrases kind of summarize everything that preceded. And again, these are words that sound a lot alike. Lovers of pleasure, lovers, not lovers of God. And all these phrases have that phileo word in there for love, the word, the brotherly love, like Philadelphia. And so you get this ring in there. But you look at these words and you think, man, that really does seem like the times in which we live. And Paul says to Timothy, there's going to be lots of people. There are lots of people out there like that. And these people even find their way into church communities. And he says they have a form of godliness. We often hear today about kind of the modern era, that it is a religious era in one way, but yet it's not religious in the way that we may think of it more traditionally. Everyone has their own sort of faith system that shapes their worldviews and values. But the problem with the people that comprise these last days, this crowd, is that they base that faith in themselves and their own passions and desires and ideas and shape it in the way that they want it to be, rather than have an objective source of it that is timelessly true from outside and beyond themselves. And because honestly, in the modern era, taking something like that from the outside, this objective set that's timelessly true for everyone everywhere, is oppressive and wrong, and we reject that in our era. But that's actually not new either. It's kind of having a form of godliness, but rejecting really the truth that is God's truth. So they're going to be challenging times in culture, and that will mark the last days. Second thing we can say is that challenging people and problems will oppress the church in this time. He says, verses 6 to 9, about these folk. They are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over gullible women, who are loaded down with sins and swayed by all kinds of evil desires, always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these teachers oppose the truth. They are men of depraved minds who, as far as the faith is concerned, are rejected. But they will not get very far because, as is the case of those men, their folly will be clear to everyone. So what is this text saying? That's kind of strange here about gullible women loaded down with sins and all of that. What's it saying? Is it saying that women are somehow like intrinsically gullible and the source of most problems in a church community? I mean, it almost sounds like it's saying something like that. No. What Paul has done here is he's picked the term. And that term, for like the gullible women, the way it's translated here, literally it means little women. And the idea, what he's done is he's kind of picked a category of people who would be particularly vulnerable and the most easily manipulated and swayed. And he uses that term to speak of kind of a vulnerable subset of people. And easy to take advantage of and to deceive. Be they men, women, young, old. These are folk who lack an intelligent foundation and moral code for living. They're not tethered to anything specific, and therefore they can be easily swayed and used, especially when errant teaching and teachers feed their simple minds and perverse desires. And the idea here is really a good translation, the idea of worming their way into the lives of a gullible set of people. It's a good translation of a person who's conniving and deceitful without being obviously so whatsoever. The ultimate snake oil salesman type of person who has a good line and an ability to communicate and look good and look knowledgeable doing it, seem to be really all together, and at the same time, though, their truth is subtly and then more and more less subtly off of center. He says of these people, he speaks first of all of this Jannes and Jambres. Now, who are they? I mean, you can go through your Bible search and you won't find these people earlier in the scripture. Jewish tradition named these as among the names of men who were magicians in Egypt at the time when Moses was doing his miraculous deeds to have Pharaoh set the people free. These are a couple of these guys who came along and to some fractional extent replicated some of the things that Moses was doing. And of course, there's a satanic power that enables some of that to happen. But that's who these guys were from a Jewish background and tradition. It would be in names that would be well known to a reader, and as Paul would write this. And so we don't want to be like those folks. He said again, always learning, never coming to a knowledge of the truth. These folk, they never arrive, but they talk like they have. And when it seems like they have a cogent message, if you hang around long enough, they'll contradict something earlier as the circumstances and so forth change. And of course, you can't have it both ways, but they want it both ways. And they're driven by immediate circumstances and the associated feelings of the moment rather than being informed by an objective sort of timeless truth. And given enough time, he says, these folks tend to hang themselves, become obvious as frauds, but in short windows of time, they can do a lot of damage. These folks have never been rare in church and religious circles. They're interested in some of the big ideas of the gospel and profess those ideas, but all of the details are rather odious to them about the gospel message, particularly about things like how you serve other people, about things like taking up a cross of suffering and following Christ by carrying your cross. But we need to understand that these people will be around the fringes of things. It's the nature of ministry in a fallen world. It will happen. It's not the mark of a church having particularly done something extraordinarily wrong, and could even be argued that perhaps a church that has had these experiences is one that could be just the opposite, having them because of the attacks of the evil one, because of successful and regular and consistent teaching of Scripture and the desire of the opposing kingdom to bring along a divergent message to lead people astray. But here's a third way of looking at this passage in verses 10 to 13. Challenges in Christian life and ministry, again, as we've just said, are normal experiences. We need to understand that suffering, challenges, it's all a normal experience. Paul says to Timothy, "You, however, know about my teaching, my way of life, my purpose, faith, patience, love, endurance, persecution, sufferings, what kinds of things happened to me in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra, the persecutions I endured. Yet the Lord rescued me from all of them. In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted, while evildoers and impostors will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived." Paul here, in referencing his own life to Timothy, to be mindful of the pattern that he has given them, can do so without any arrogance. Likely here he's writing under a death sentence, and he is writing from prison, facing likely execution. His life story at this point in his ministry career had a lot of chapters, and he'd been faithful in the midst of all that happened to him and through him. And he mentions about how Timothy would be mindful of the things that happened to him, and he lists 3 places: Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. And these events are in Acts chapters 13 and 14, and I think they're in one of the more humorous passages, really, of Scripture, in Acts 13 and 14, Paul on a missionary journey. Now, this Antioch he's talking about here is not the Antioch of Syria, the church that had sent them out on the missions journey, but this is another, this is what we know as in Pisidia, or Pisidian Antioch. And Paul and Barnabas were there. They preached on the Sabbath day in the synagogue, and they were invited to come back the next week, and people were impressed with the message. It says on the next Sabbath, almost the whole city gathered to hear the word of the Lord. And when the Jews saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy, and they began to contradict what Paul was saying and heaped abuse on them. But Paul preaches boldly in the next several passages here in Acts 13, quoting from the Old Testament and so on, about the Gentiles coming to salvation and so on. And it says, "The word of the Lord spread through the whole region. But the Jewish leaders incited the God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city, and they stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from the region. And so they had to leave." The next place they go is Iconium, the next place that Paul talks about. It says, "At Iconium, Paul and Barnabas went as usual into the Jewish synagogue. They spoke so effectively that a great number of Jews and Greeks believed. But the Jews who refused to believe stirred up other Gentiles and poisoned their mind against them." And so after spending time there, they move on again. And they go to the next place, the third place he mentions here, in Lystra. This is Timothy's hometown now. The third place. This is where Timothy grew up. In Lystra, there sat a man who was lame. He'd been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened as Paul was speaking, and Paul looked directly at him. Basically, he heals the guy. The guy jumps up and begins to walk. The crowd is amazed that Paul has done this. Barnabas is with him. This is the passage where the crowd begins to call them gods and believes that it's two of the Zeus and so on, and Hermes, who's come to be amongst them, and they're getting together some animals to sacrifice to Paul and Barnabas, and they're trying to settle down this whole thing. And anyhow, it said, even with all these words, he said, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. Then, next verse, some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, the last 2 stops, and they won the crowd over. And they stoned Paul, dragged him out of the city, thinking he was dead. When the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city, as I always say, because he hadn't finished his sermon. That's what he's talking about. That's the historical record of the things that had happened that were well known to Timothy as things that he had experienced. And so Paul is saying, compared to these snake oil salesmen that are inevitably around the ministries, he says, you know about me, my teaching, my way of life. He said, you know the kinds of things that had happened. And Paul does not use the word pattern here in this paragraph. It's used multiple times, though, in the pastoral epistles and other portions written to both Timothy and to Titus, where Paul says, follow this pattern is the word that's been said, a pattern, an outline, a form, a paradigm. that Timothy and Titus could use as they came along behind him as younger men as to how you go about doing ministry successfully, even in a crazy environment. He speaks of 7 patterns, the first 7 patterns here of his teaching, which was consistent on the gospel. His lifestyle, again, a consistent model of endurance. His purpose for all he did was to point to Christ, as he so often said and lived out. Paul's faith in every circumstance, trusting in God that the good things and the bad things, that they all work together for God's good and the kingdom's purposes. His patience with people and problems. Yes, it had a limit. It had a time where he said enough, but he was tremendously patient in bringing people along. Paul's love for others and for the Lord, we hear that in his letters and his greetings and so on. And then he speaks of that again, that endurance that never seemed to end. So there's 7 things that you see there, but look at verses. Look at let's see where we are, verse 11. Look at the 8th and 9th items in this pattern that Paul is giving to follow. It says, persecutions, sufferings. Hold it. That's not right. How can that be? The first 7 things, you see that, I get that. That's all good stuff, but these are bad things. But Paul is saying to Timothy, you got to understand. Persecution, suffering, it's par in the Christian experience in life, in ministry. And if you don't have some of it going on, basically what it means is you're not really living out there for the Lord, or perhaps you're just living in a time that's extraordinarily unusual. And I think we have, as Americans heretofore, in recent generations, lived in an extraordinarily unusual time of peace for the gospel. And perhaps, again, in the theme of the last days, that's been made possible that through the unique American experience, the exceptionalism of America, that the gospel could go forward to the ends of the world, as it says would happen in the last times. And so, but sufferings and persecutions, they're normal. We've lived in an unusual time, and perhaps that time will change. It kind of cracks me up how both sides, the political aisle right now, are claiming that there are more people for them than are saying so in the polls, because people they kind of don't want to publicly say I'm voting for him or her, but they just don't want to kind of be acknowledged, and therefore we're really ahead because these people are quietly kind of for us. You know what? You don't want to be that kind of follower of Christ, okay? That's kind of like hiding because of who you're really for. You want to be living it in a way that folks know that you are for Jesus Christ. And he says evildoers and imposters will increase. And it's sad, honestly, as I look back on what are now decades of ministry and just kind of recall the wreckage along the way of people who were not really of the truth, people who for a time seemed to be like partners in ministries for this season of life, and actually they weren't. They really weren't connected to the truth. They went in errant directions, and there was no future in continued ministry. And honestly, I want to tell you, I've had kind of a dark number of days recently, and kind of reflecting on this yesterday. Why am I dealing with it? Why is like the dark cloud kind of come down? And I think some of it is just the time in which we're living. If you read my Facebook stuff I wrote this week about just kind of being out in the streets this week with some of the protest group and with several pastors trying to calm that, and it just the odd time in which we're living. It's sad to me, and I find that discouraging. But I think a bigger thing is actually the sermon theme that is here today about the difficult people along the way and the sad things that you encounter. And it's not just this, but it's writing the devotionals that go along with it. There's so often in these letters of Timothy and to Titus, where there are people who were kind of lost along the way. And I hate that. I just hate that. And it bothers me, and it travels with me. And I have found this sort of accumulated kind of sadness of people that have drifted away or chosen to go in errant directions, not really truly being connected into the truth. And now let me say to the person that's here, and perhaps it's your first time at Tri-State, and you're hearing this and you're thinking, wow, that pastor's up there talking about all these problems and people and this, I don't know about this place. Hey, again, let me tell you what the text is talking about. It's not unusual, and I'll be honest with you and tell you we probably had less of it than most churches experience over the years. And I'm not just in my own life thinking here. I'm thinking of places even prior to that. So don't be weirded out. Truly, don't be weirded out being here today. But the point of this whole passage is that in this fallen world, it is inevitable that there's going to be errant sorts of teachings around us of people who kind of have some of the truth, but they don't have it all, and it takes a while to see all of that as it plays out over time. And hey, it happened to Paul. It happened to Timothy. I don't think we're at some level beyond where they are. So get the picture there on that. Hey, let's finish the final paragraph. And the fourth thing to say is the challenges are no match for the perfectly equipped servant, verses 14 to 17. But as for you, continue in what you've learned and have become convinced of, because you know those from whom you learned it, how from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. All Scripture is God-breathed, and it's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work, to be thoroughly equipped. Hey, Paul's most common theme he starts with here is of continuance and endurance. Just keep moving, keep being faithful, keep going, just keep going on. When I was a cross-country coach for those 13 years with high school kids, and I'm around the course and they're running by, and you see somebody coming along and they're not having a very good day. They're kind of struggling a little bit. The race isn't going so great for them today. And I'd often say, it's all right, just keep going. Come on, just keep moving, just keep moving along. We'll sort it out, Try to keep them going. That's what he's saying to Timothy. Timothy probably had some oxygen deprivation in the race of ministry, and he needed some encouragement to keep moving. We see here the admonition to a connection with time-proven truth. Timothy should remember where it came from, the source, who it was in, how he had gained it from the beginning of his life, who had taught it to him, how God had been faithful to them. If he continues in this, God will be faithful to him along the way. And to reflect here on how this truth is the plug-in that makes all the difference, past, present, and future. There is an objective source of truth, and without it, everyone's lost. We're all disconnected without that. The Scripture, he says, being God-breathed by the Spirit, is effective for teaching, for rebuke of error, for fine-tuning and correcting on the path of life, and for very positive training of how to live a righteous and effective life. So what does it mean to be thoroughly equipped? If you have this as an objective source and you learn and you grow in it and you have it as a tool, the idea here is a person who is thoroughly equipped. What does it mean to be thoroughly equipped? If you're going to do some backwoods camping in the Rockies, say, you want to be thoroughly equipped. You want to have what you need to be successful doing that. Now, our fourth son, Jesse, who's a little crazy, just did this with some people he knows. He spent a week not at the campgrounds with Smokey the Bear. He was hiking up into the mountains, fishing, camping, backwoods stuff. And it took a lot of planning. They got together. They made sure they had everything they needed, including guns for the possibility of grizzlies. And of course, to help mom and dad feel better, he sends us a picture at the end of a grizzly that walked by, okay? A person who is thoroughly equipped. We might think of how we say about a certain person doing a job, and we say, you know what? You know the phrase, they were made to do this. They are perfect for this position. That person has all the skills and requisite tools to be successful as what they do. And a disconnect from objective truth is a source that's at the source of all the challenges that come along in ministry and in all of life for that matter. Societies disintegrate without objective truth. This is what is true and right all times and all places. And if you don't know it, you can't be informed by it. Or if you think you know it, but you really don't know it accurately, you can't be informed by it. Or it could be that you know it, but you don't choose to listen to it. Well, then what good is timeless truth? I do a lot of biking. You hear me talk about that. And I like to think I'm really prepared. I have a couple different bikes that I use, and they're fairly high level. And I think I'm prepared and equipped. You know, I got good equipment. I attach my pump, and I have my tools for tire changes and mechanical adjustments. But the problem is that I'm too mechanically stupid to be good at doing any of those things when the time comes. And so it's been kind of a joke over this year. You also know I sometimes meet with groups at Antietam Battlefield and do tour guide things. Well, I become the bike tour guide. So there's this outfitter group that comes from New England, and they're riding along the East Coast, and they come through, and I'm the guy who rides them around the battlefield and talks about it on bike. So I'm on my bike. Well, I really don't have that many crashes and bad things happen and bike breakdowns, but it seems like whenever this one particular group comes, I mean, I've had a flat tire. Next time, my chain threw off, and I didn't know what to do. So it's become a joke that when I come, something goes wrong. So I've started taking alternate bikes so I get my stuff repaired when the guy comes through. But this guy, the guy who's like leading it, he's out there riding with us, and he's got a couple of bags. Well, every time something goes wrong, he has just the thing. He's, and right away, he's digging, he's getting a tool, boom, boom, boom. He's changed a tire. I couldn't get it off in the time, and he had it changed and pumped. He tweaks things, he fixes it. He has everything he needs right with him to do anything that might happen along the way. And I've looked at this guy's amazing. He's thoroughly equipped. And that's the way we want to be in the Christian life, to be fully prepared, because we have a knowledge of the scriptures that informs us as to how we handle whatever contingencies come along. If you ever traveled in a foreign country, if you aren't prepared, you'll get lost very quickly. Our trip to England or to Europe a few years ago, and I've experienced this in England. Of course, you pull out of the rental car place, and now you're on the wrong side of the road, the wrong side of the car. You got to be ready for it. Driving around Italy, oh my gosh, if you've ever been to Italy and drive, oh my, it's just life-threatening. But you got to be ready for it. You got to know where to go the whole trip, where you're going to stay, where you're going to park, what places you're going to go to, and what time, and how do you get there, how do you use the public transportation. And you just got this sense all along the way that you're not really, you're not home, you're not in your own culture, and you're just out of sync with what's going on as much as you're prepared for it. And the more preparation you can have, the better you can be. But along the way, there's going to be a couple of surprises. And when we were in France in 2013, we happened to be there on May the 1st. Don't go to Paris on May the 1st. It's May Day, okay? It's a national holiday. It's basically a leftist political day. And so we came out of a subway, walked up on the street, and there we are in the middle of a socialist parade. Guys are handing us communism literature. It was really, really strange. We had no idea that we were doing this, and so you got to adjust on the fly to what's happening around you. The fact of the matter is that we are strangers in a foreign land. Spiritually speaking, of our system, of our connection to eternal truth, we live. The scriptures come right out and say it this way, that we are sojourning. We are strangers in an alien place. Our home is not here. Our home is somewhere else. We are people of another kingdom, and we live and move here as strangers here. And the tour book, the guide that we have, the resource that we have that informs us and helps us be prepared is the Bible, the scriptures that God has given us. And as we know that, and we can never get to the bottom of it all, but as much as we can learn and grow and continually grow and learn that and know that, we can become that person with all the gadgets, with all the tools, with all the resources that we need to be, as Paul puts it here, thoroughly equipped for success in a crazy, crazy place. And I hope as we make that last point, that what it does is that it does grab you and encourage you with the idea of, yeah, it is crazy. There's crazy teaching, there's crazy viewpoints, there's crazy people, it's a crazy world. And I need to be resourced. I need to know the scriptures to have success in this life. And that's what we're about as a church. That's what in 15 minutes from now, classes begin. That's why we write things for you to read online. That's what we do. All we do, that you can be that person who is thoroughly equipped by the objective truth of God's word to be a successful kingdom warrior for the kingdom of truth. I hope you want to be that person, and I hope it drives you to the scriptures, perhaps as never before. Let's be dismissed in prayer.